welcome to another episode of the Brown and Black podcast. My name is Jack Rico.
And I'm Mike Sargent.
And every week we take a look at race and pop culture through a brown and black lens. This week, we're going to bring you a special sponsored episode featuring an in-depth analysis of a brand new Audible original supernatural thriller called Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi, starring McLaughlin from Stranger Things. And I'm going to tell you right now, this series is going to challenge every assumption you have had about what it means to be black in America.
But I wanted to give a shout out for Audible and thank them for their support for this episode. Now, let's do our deep dive into Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi.
We just flew 15 hours smack dab into the middle of Zimbabwe, Africa, to find our roots.
Ah, yep. This is what I'm talking about. This right here. This is Africa.
We were about to learn so much more about ourselves than we could have ever prepared for.
So let's set this up for the listeners, Mike, about what exactly is Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi. It's a 6-episode audio drama from the giant company Audible, and it follows the Wallace family, an upper-middle-class family from Detroit, who take this luxury safari to Zimbabwe, Africa, hoping to connect with their African heritage. But while they're there, they wake up something that should have stayed buried.
They disturb something. This is really a part horror story, part reckoning with identity and history. And it also stars Kevin Carroll as Bill, the dad, Christina Elmore as Anita, who plays the mom of Deshaun, and Jessica Michaela, who is the sister, Lamara, and Tungai Carissa as a great character, Solomon.
Let's begin with this, Mike. What were your first impressions of listening to Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi, an audio drama, not a movie, not a television series, but an audio drama?
Well, first of all, I have to give you some context. Now, those who have been listening to Brown and Black for a long time maybe heard me mention more than once that I started out in radio drama, pre-podcast era. And when I was doing radio drama, I did science fiction, black science fiction radio drama. Nobody was doing anything even close to that. And most people my age were like, radio drama? What the hell is that? Nobody listens to the radio for stories anymore. Going into this, I'm excited because now audio dramas, audio podcasts, scripted podcasts is a thing. So for me, this brings back my childhood because I was one of those kids, and I don't think there were any other black kids, that was listening to radio drama, discovering radio drama from like maybe 10 years old till into my teens. So for me, being able to put on headphones and see the movie in my head, see this story in my head, see these characters in my head brought back a flood of memories. And there's a reason why radio was king for so long in this country.
I want to tell you my experience of listening to this audio drama personally.
In this land, in this place, terrible things can happen to those of us careless enough to disrespect our ancestors.
We listen to podcasts, we listen to music, but stories like this, black horror like this, for me, I'm now used to seeing like black horror on the screen. Get Out, Sinners just recently. But through the audio experience, I was like, so this is pretty much like theater. It's like a movie. So what do I do? How do I experience it, Mike? So I decided that I was going to go ahead, and I have a screening room here. And I said, dude, I think I need to hook this up to my sound system. Turned off all the lights because there's no movies to watch, right? You can't watch anything. So I just darkened the whole room, pitch black, laid down and cranked up the first episode. Dude, wow. My senses were going crazy. My heart was beating like within the first 7 minutes because like the horror kicks in fast. But it was also experiencing like Africa. Like I was in Africa for a minute. But to me, the format of listening to this awakened other senses that I don't feel I use enough. And it just stayed with me a lot more. I can tell you this. Audio horror feels like real horror, man. When I watch horror on screen, maybe it's the years and decades of camp horror that I don't take it that seriously anymore. I don't get scared. Here, it felt real, Mike. Did you get that feeling?
Dude, listen, first of all, I go into this a little different than you, like I said, because of my experience. So the first thing I'm listening for is, okay, what kind of sound design are they going to do? So I'm like, okay. And you're right. I was immersed instantly. And I was immersed instantly, not just for the sounds, but I was very impressed. Having listened to radio drama as long as I have, and I know the history of radio drama, and we could break down some of that later. As a matter of fact, I'll even say that I think that Jordan Peele is a fan of horror radio drama because his company, Monkey Paw, is like one of the first radio horror dramas ever from 1928. But for me, as I'm listening to it, what I was really struck by is not just the sounds, but the acting and the attention to detail and where these characters are placed in the space. You hear them walk from one side of the room to the other, and you hear the door, and you hear them stop at a certain point or come back, and all of it. So what I loved was just the whole concept that, like you mentioned, it's like you're listening to a movie. It was cinematic. And we're in the age now where the kind of acting that would have flown 100 years ago wouldn't fly today. So you have to have this naturalistic acting where characters say things. They say things under their breath. They have half sentences. And this felt very real. I felt I was spending time with his family. I felt, like you said, I went to Africa. I enjoyed this immensely.
I want to start off with you first. There were some things in there that I felt were almost taboo to talk about. How did you feel about this story and some of the buttons it pushed?
Well, I felt a lot of things. One, the idea of a Black family that decides to go back to Zimbabwe to in some way reconnect with their roots in some way. This is something that is discussed within Black families. The whole notion of back to Africa and what that means and what that would be like and whether it's something you want to see. It's on your bucket list. If you're a Black person, you want to visit the quote unquote, the motherland. So that's a thing. And you understood that. But one of the things that really stood out to me dramatically is how adult this is. There are adult themes. There's adult language, and we're in a different age. There was a time where audio drama, radio drama had to be pretty sanitized because it was on the radio.
Dude, this is rated R, man.
This is like, rated R.
This is like, whoa, rated R.
That's right. So it's rated R with its themes, the language, with the sexuality, with some of the White Lotus stuff that's going on in there. And
it's violent.
It's violent and enormously effective in terms of how this story is told, because it's narrated by the teenage protagonist, Deshaun Wallace. He narrates what's happening as it's happening. As a narrative device, I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was seamless. I thought the idea that, once again, something we discussed when we did our episode on Get Out, the idea that you can take genre now, and especially horror, and talk about all these deeply Black issues. And this, not just deeply Black, American Black, but our relationship with Africa, Africa's relationship with us, Africans' relationship with us, and our relationship to Africans, how we see them, how they see us, all of that stuff coming out. Not to mention, we've got a teenage protagonist. There's a generation gap. There's the way they think versus the way the adults think and all of that stuff happening. I thought in the 3 hours, packed enough for a 21 episode story.
In the last episode of Sinners, you and I were talking about how genre is probably one of the coolest devices in storytelling where you can pack so many layers in.
Without it being heavy-handed.
Exactly. And so I think kudos out to director-creator Nyasha Hatendi, who is the visionary of this story. He kind of really broke down a bunch of themes, Mike, that I, as a Latino, was a little kind of stunned of how to react to it because my experience with it wasn't as much. Number one, I felt that this, instead of being like like the typical Western American Hollywood story that puts Africa in the background, I felt like Africa was the main subject that was receiving this Black American family. So it felt like an African story.
He was born here in America. His dad is from Zimbabwe. So he's
Zimbabwe-American.
He's Zimbabwe-American. He's lived in the UK, America, and Zimbabwe. So he probably has intimate knowledge of the disconnect versus the connect between your African heritage and your African-American heritage.
And so then he informs all of his characters and infuses them with that tension that, to me as a Latino, is going, yo, what's going on here? Because I don't live inside a Black body. I don't live a Black life. I don't understand the historic struggle, either from Africa or in the United States, of Black identity. And so a lot of this is throwing me going, yo, is this something like new that I'm not hearing about Black culture for the very first time? I got a lot of questions for Mike. This story for me is about two key things. One is, what does Black identity mean today, not just in America, but globally? And who gets to say what Black identity is? Is it Africa, or is it the African American? And those are two different things. The other thing that kind of really stood out to me was this American superiority, this American exceptionalism that betrays the victimization of whatever historic ancestry you had that was victimized as well. The only way I could relate to these things was the same way that Nyasha is Zimbabwe-American, I'm Colombian-American. My parents were born in Colombia. I was born in Queens, New York. But after a certain point, when I used to go to Colombia, Colombians didn't look at me as a Colombian, even though I felt like I spoke like them, I looked like them. But they knew I wasn't one of them. They knew there were things about me that was too privileged for them to ignore. And I was blinded to it. And what was that? It was my Americanness. Dude, I don't know if Americans of any racial denomination understand this, that when you travel outside of America, there's this sense, and it's intuitive, Mike, that you're better than everybody else. And I don't know how I got that, but I got it. When I went to Colombia, at first I was like, why do I feel like I'm better than you guys? And I felt guilty about it. And so as I'm hearing this story of the Wallace family arriving to this luxury hotel, and where the Africans are serving the Black Americans, there's already a hierarchy there, man. And the fact that they're not really there to give back necessarily, but they're there to learn, have fun, and then go back to being American, while the Africans get to stay being Africans. And the tension of this started right off the bat. Like within the first 10 minutes, you could already feel the tension. And by the time you get to the end, man, you have so many questions about Black identity. What were your particular takes of what Nyasha Hatendi was trying to say here about Black identity?
Well, I think he's saying something that scholars are talking about now. There's an emphasis on what they call diasporic fluidity, where Black identity is not fixed, but it's constantly negotiated. And you mentioned Black American exceptionalism. It's the way I see it, it's a reality and a myth. As African Americans, we've made a disproportionate cultural impact, but we're not more Black or more advanced or better than other members. And so our perception, and I say our African Americans' perception of Africa, is filtered often through white media. And the old idea of what could be called heritage tourism, okay, which is something we may touch upon later. When you go to Africa, are you going to go to a major city in Africa, or are you going to go on like a safari? There's some scenes in there where the character's like, we're in Africa. And just that whole sort of embracing and mocking at the same time is something I felt acutely too. I think many African Americans have fallen prey to having our own stereotypes about our own brothers and sisters in Africa. And I think same thing happens for Africans in how they, and this comes out in some of the characters in the story, may look down on us because of our holier than thou attitude or our dismissive attitude.
But to me, that to me was insane, because in America, Blacks are the victimized. They're in the story sense, they're the Africans, that nothing worse could happen. Yet they coexist with the privilege of being an American once they leave the country. Like, you've seen when a Black person goes to Japan, they can't walk down the street, bro. They're like celebrities. And wow. It's that Black American swagger. When I was growing up in Queens, there was only one Black identity, and that was the one from my block. And we were all listening to hip hop because hip hop was just hitting. Hot 97, we were all just listening to Hot 97. And then I ended up leaving to Colombia. And the next time I saw a Black person, they were speaking Spanish. And that personality, that hip hop, baggy clothes, that hard identity of the 80s and 90s, these Black people in Colombia didn't have that. They were really poor. And white passing Hispanics would treat them as inferior. Most Black people in Colombia are considered inferior status. What kind of Black person is this? Because he ain't the New York Black. When you go back to New York, they don't talk about the Afro-Latino. And if the Afro-Latino shows up in a Black American space, they're not acknowledged as one of them. So for me, going when I was young, seeing Blacks as one single identity throughout the world, and then the slow realization, and now through the medium of pop culture and storytelling, they're finally tackling this tension that I always thought wasn't a thing because no one talks about it in America, but it's a thing.
Why have you always got to disrespect somebody, huh?
Disrespectful of what? A bunch of bullshit stories?
Bill!
That's enough!
A sacrilege has occurred, and it must be remedied.
Bill and Anita, something tragic happened to them before they went to Africa. And their marriage just really hasn't been the same. They're heading out to Africa to try and heal from this tragic event. In the process, they're also trying to reconnect the family energy together. But this family is not together. This is a very dysfunctional family. And Mike, you were saying earlier in the show how this is a very brutally honest series, very graphic. The language is very powerful. It's very strong.
And very real.
And very real. And I think that realness, I don't know if I'm used to it. And it comes across a lot more real when it's just audio and you're just listening. There was one quote that disturbed me, and is when Caleb's character, Deshaun, says, "Fuck family." Dude, that just, I had to put the headphones down for a second. This feels too real, and I don't know if I can feel this kid's anger.
Yes.
I can feel this kid's pain. And according to the Mbirwi myth, this is what the Mbirwi, this monster, this mythical monster from Africa that comes out to fight colonialism, it feeds on weakness and pain. We're finding a family here that can't seem to get it together. And in the rage of Deshaun being like this for a while, he goes and he acts up in Africa. We're then caught in that moment that sets everything into this horror place, into what seems like hell by the second, third episode, Mike. It's like the hell that the demons inside this family matching up against the historical colonial trauma of the African characters. They're both broken, but they're both trying to heal as well. In that healing, there's a moment where you ask yourself, and I'm not black, and I don't know if a black person would ask themselves, but who is right here? Who is right morally here? And who is right today?
I don't want to give away too much of the story, but some of the characters, specifically Deshaun, doesn't have the most respect for not only traditions, but for Africans and being there and all of it, and family. And we also see that some of the Africans, when put in the position, don't have a whole lot of respect for the African Americans.
No.
And so as a result, what it's also emphasizing is that we're all disconnected from how we should be connected. And we're all vulnerable to disrespecting that connection.
Aren't you ready?
Dad, why are they staring at us like that?
It's you, isn't it?
I don't know what she's talking about.
Liar!
Mike, one of the things that I wanted to ask you and talk about was the concept of African horror. I feel like just this decade, I got into American black horror for the first time through Jordan Peele and Get Out, and then Us, and we've been treated to some really good black horror, American-wise. But African horror, to me, is not something that I usually think of when I say black horror. But Sinners did something very interesting where it did bridge those two storylines. As a film director also who has directed horror movies, what's the big difference in the horror in African horror and Black American horror?
Well, to me, the big difference is this. Africa is a culture that has lots of mythologies, and storytelling is a big part of African culture. And so there are all kinds of religious, supernatural, there are all kinds of beings, there are all kinds of myths and stories. So a lot of that horror, a lot of African horror is rooted in those things that you know of, you've heard of. While Black American horror, even in something like Sinners, still falls back on more traditional American horror, vampires, or European horror, vampires, werewolves. We've seen black horror, they're evil spirits. African Americans We've only been here a few hundred years, so we don't have this long history unless it's something that we brought from Africa here and have some version of. So I feel like African horror is much more deeply rooted in the historical culture of Africa and what those mythologies have been versus Black horror. Black American horror is very different. It's more different takes on whether it's evil, and I always break horror down. There's only two categories. All right, there's supernatural horror, and then there's humans doing really evil things horror.
Right.
And so I think that's the category that Black American horror falls into. I feel like Sinners expanded that by going multicultural, but African horror is always very rooted in African mythologies.
As I'm going through the series, it is clearly obvious that the metaphoric horror here is this, what you were talking a little while ago, this heritage tourism. This, instead of going to the cities, you go to the safaris, and it becomes Mustafa and the Lion King.
Exactly.
Right? And these guys start acting like the characters in there, and you start slowly noticing that's a form of demeaning one's culture. It's clear that colonialism has left and continues to hold horror in Africa. And I think that Hatendi is really trying to get the point across is the reason that Black Americans feel the way they do, and the reason that Africans feel the way they do, is that they're united by colonialism. It's happening geographically in different places, but that's the one thing that they do connect on, right?
Oh, yeah, because just like this family is lost, we're lost culturally because of colonialism, because of that disconnect where we should not be. So I have to mention Caleb McLaughlin's performance because part of that difficulty is understanding when you're narrating. And he does this thing where you as the audience don't know what's going to happen next, but he knows because he's narrating in the past tense.
Because the truth always feels like a punishment.
Ah, shit!
What the heck was that? It was dead silent. As if sound had been drained from the world and I was all alone in a vacuum. The hairs were standing on the back of my neck, but nothing happened. Until...
And all of that nuance, that's where the skill comes in. For as young as Caleb is, I think he gave a fantastic performance. I completely bought where he was, the confusion. And what you also get is hearing him as a narrator. You don't realize it till the end, but by the time he's narrating this, he has grown as a person. Yeah. He's not that same impulsive, angry all the time kid. And he's looking back on himself, trying not to judge himself. All those things are very subtle. And I think they all came across.
So here's a kid who was the only Black star in the ensemble of Stranger Things.
He was the Black kid.
He was the Black kid in Stranger Things. And the show became one of the biggest, most epic shows in the last 10 years. It's part of pop culture now.
Completely.
There was a lot of talk about what he was going to do after Stranger Things. Like, what does his career look like? How does he leverage the popularity of Stranger Things? And what does he do next? And Mike, I think this is his star vehicle, man. I think Sacrilege is where you see Caleb's full range of acting skills. He's channeling anger. He's channeling arrogance. He's channeling sacrifice. He's channeling love and hate all at the same time vocally. And that's when you say, okay, not anybody can just do that.
No, No.
And the fact that Caleb McLaughlin has stepped into this role and just crushed it. Dude, I can't wait to see what the rest of his career looks like.
And I think even the other actors, just as soon as you hear the dad talk, as soon as you hear the mom talk, you instantly have a picture of those characters.
Right.
And that partially comes down to acting and casting.
Well, Mike, as we are heading towards the end of the episode, this has been a really great conversation about Black horror, specifically right now in America, how Black horror is really having a moment. But I love the introduction of audio horror and audio dramas to really bring in these genres for what is a Black original story that bridges Black American culture and African culture. And I think that a lot of people who might not be Black like myself who are hearing this are going to find this not only really scary, not only really violent, not only providing all of the great things that great horror does, but it's intellectual as well. And it deals with some deep social commentary that to me should be challenging for people who are not Black to investigate and know more about what is Black identity today and who gets to call what Black is today.
I agree. And I will also say, I feel, as we've talked about here, it sets the bar pretty high. Because now, if you hear another horror audio drama, is it as good as Sacrilege?
I got from it so many amazing things, Mike. I feel like I know the Black culture a little bit more. I feel like I understand American exceptionalism from a different perspective, from a Black perspective that I never got before. I feel that as a critic and a cultural commentator, I want to introduce more audio dramas into the things that I listen to, into my preferences, because I think that audio dramas might just become the new hot wave medium of telling stories.
I do as well. I found it very inspirational, considering I came from audio drama. And I think it's a little over 80 years since the first Black horror radio drama was called The Black Castle back in the 40s. And I think we're in a new age. There are things that he's done here that I think haven't even been done in film that much yet. So I think he is clearly a master storyteller, and I absolutely want to see what else he does. But I'm also excited, Jack, that you're down with audio drama.
Absolutely, man. Well, that's it for this special episode of Brown and Black of Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi. We wanted to thank Audible again for their paid support of this episode.
You can listen to Sacrilege, Curse of the Mbirwi right now on Audible. Just go to audible.com/sacrilege and experience this in Dolby Atmos right now.
We'll see you on the next episode of Brown and Black.